The hum of the industrial HVAC system was the only thing keeping Albert company as he began his final sweep of the third floor. At 3:14 a.m., Oak Haven Mall wasn't just empty. It felt hollowed out, like a rib cage of glass and steel, stripped of its meat. Albert shifted his heavy-duty flashlight from his left hand to his right. He was 52, with knees that clicked like a ticking clock, and he had worked this beat for 6 years. He knew the groans of the escalators and the way the mannequins in the high-end boutiques seemed to lean slightly forward after the lights went out. He was used to the silence, but tonight the silence had a different texture. It felt heavy, like it was pressing against his eardrums. He was heading back to the security kiosk near the main fountain, a 20-minute walk through the winding corridors, when he saw it. He was passing the Grand Plaza, a massive junction where the luxury wing met the sprawling hypermarket. The supermarket's gate was a wall of cold, corrugated metal, pulled down and locked tight. At least, it should have been. A movement caught the edge of his vision. A shadow, darker than the surrounding gloom, detached itself from the pillar near the pharmacy entrance. It didn't walk, it flowed. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it moved with a frantic, jerky gait, like a film reel skipping frames. It sprinted toward the supermarket's side service entrance, a door that was strictly for staff and supposed to be deadbolted from the inside. The shadow didn't slow down. It hit the door and seemed to vanish into it, the heavy metal door swinging shut with a soft, wet thud that echoed through the atrium. Albert froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, like a trapped bird. "Security," he called out, his voice cracking. "Who's there?" No answer, only the distant, rhythmic dripping of the fountain. Protocol dictated he call it in. He reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. But then he remembered the service door. If a door was left unsecured, it was his job to lock it. If he reported an intruder and it turned out to be a glitch in the motion sensors or a trick of the light, the night supervisor would have his head for the paperwork. Greed for a quiet night won over his better judgment. He approached the service door. As he got closer, he noticed something strange. The air around the door was cold, colder than the rest of the air-conditioned mall. It smelled of old copper and spoiled produce. He pushed the door. It wasn't just unlocked. The latch was broken, twisted as if something had pulled it from the inside with immense strength. Albert stepped into the supermarket. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of cereal boxes and towers of canned soup. The silence here was absolute. Not even the hum of the refrigerators reached this section. "Hello?" he whispered. He followed the path the shadow had taken, moving toward the back of the store, the meat and dairy section. His light flickered. He tapped it against his palm, and the beam returned, but it was dimmer, the edges of the light yellowing. As he rounded the corner to the deli counter, he saw the shadow again. It was standing by the large walk-in freezer. It was no longer running. It was crouched, its back to him. In the dim light, Albert could see the thing's spine, knobby, protruding vertebrae that pushed against skin the color of a drowned man. It was unnervingly long, its limbs folded like a spider's, and it was eating. The sound was a wet, rhythmic tearing. Rip, schlick, crunch. Albert's flashlight beam hit the creature's head. It didn't have hair. Its skin was translucent, stretched tight over a narrow skull. It didn't turn around immediately. It stopped chewing, its long gray fingers stilled over the carcass of something Albert couldn't quite identify. Then, slowly, it began to stand. It kept rising and rising. Its head brushed the hanging signs for fresh poultry. When it finally turned, Albert saw that it had no eyes, just deep, weeping pits of blackness, and a mouth that unhinged far too low, filled with rows of needle-thin teeth. It didn't scream. It made a sound like a heavy weight being dragged over gravel. Albert backed away, his boots squeaking on the linoleum. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. The creature's head snapped toward him. It tilted its neck at an impossible 90-degree angle, sniffing the air. A long black tongue licked the gore from its chin. Albert turned and bolted. He didn't look back, but he could hear it. It wasn't running on two legs. He heard the rapid-fire clack, clack, clack of multiple limbs hitting the floor. It was gaining. He burst through the service door and out into the mall's Grand Plaza. He didn't head for the kiosk. He headed for the main exit, the massive glass doors that led to the parking lot. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them. They clattered onto the polished marble. He dropped to his knees, frantically sweeping his hands across the floor. Behind him, the clacking stopped. He looked up. The mall was dark. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. He saw his keys lying 3 feet away, near the base of a decorative planter. He reached for them, but a hand, gray, wet, and ending in jagged black nails, slid out from the shadows of the planter and rested on top of the keyring. Albert looked up. The creature was perched on top of the planter, looking down at him with its empty sockets. It leaned in close, its breath smelling of the freezer and the grave. It raised a single finger to its lipless mouth. "Shh," it hissed, the sound echoing the HVAC system. "The mall is closed." The next morning, the day shift found the keys on the floor. The service door to the supermarket was locked from the inside. Albert's radio was found in the meat department, sitting neatly on top of the deli counter. Albert himself was never found, but sometimes, during the late-night shift, the new guards hear the sound of someone clicking their knees, walking just out of sight behind the mannequins. The credits rolled in, a silence so absolute it felt heavy. John sat alone in row L, the flickering light of the projector dying out until the theater was swallowed by a thick velvet darkness. He had chosen the 11:45 p.m. showing of a low-budget indie flick, thinking the solitude of an empty cinema would be relaxing. Now, the silence felt less like peace and more like a held breath. He stood up, his knees popping in the quiet. He made his way down the sticky carpeted stairs, the dim floor lights providing a meager amber trail. As he pushed through the heavy exit doors into the mall corridor, the transition was jarring. The mall was a skeleton of its daytime self. The vibrant neon signs of the food court were dark, and the long, tiled hallways stretched out like bleached bones under the hum of emergency lighting. His footsteps echoed against the polished marble. He was headed toward the north exit, passing the shuttered storefronts of clothing boutiques and jewelry shops. That's when he felt it. A prickle at the base of his neck. The sensation of being watched from behind a curtain. He stopped. The echo of his footsteps didn't stop immediately. There was one extra tap, soft, like a bare foot hitting the floor. John turned around. The corridor behind him was a tunnel of gray shadows. "Hello?" he called out. His voice was thin, swallowed by the vastness of the atrium. No one answered, but as he turned back toward the exit, he saw her. She was standing near the entrance of the cinema he had just left. At first, she looked like a trick of the light, a smudge of static against the dark entryway. She wore a dress that might have once been white, now stained the color of old parchment. Her hair was a matted shroud, obscuring her face, hanging down to her waist. She wasn't moving. She was just there. John's heart hammered against his ribs. "The mall is closed," he managed to say, his logic trying to override his mounting primal fear. "You should probably head out." The woman tilted her head. It wasn't a natural movement. It was a sharp, mechanical snap, her neck bending at an angle that would have snapped a human spine. Then she began to walk. She didn't glide, she lurched. With every step, her body contorted, her limbs twitching as if she were being pulled by invisible, clumsy strings. John didn't wait. He bolted. He ran past the darkened fountain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked back over his shoulder and nearly stumbled. She was closer. Much closer. She wasn't running, but every time he looked away and looked back, she had gained dozens of yards, her distorted frame flickering like a corrupted film reel. He reached the glass doors of the north exit and grabbed the handles. Locked. "No, no, no," he hissed, rattling the metal. He fumbled for his phone to call for help, but his hands were shaking so violently he dropped it. The screen shattered against the marble, the light dying instantly. He looked up. The woman was at the end of the hall now. The emergency lights above her began to buzz and pop, dying out one by one as she passed under them. The darkness was following her, a physical wave of shadow. In the dying light, he finally saw her face, or what was left of it. Her skin was pulled tight over a skull that seemed too large, and where her eyes should have been, there were only wet, weeping craters. Her mouth was open, stretched into an impossible O, revealing a throat that looked like a bottomless pit of ink. John scrambled toward the service stairs, his lungs burning. He burst through the door and began to climb, the metallic clang of the stairs echoing in the narrow shaft. He reached the second floor and collapsed against the door, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a sound started from the bottom of the stairwell. It was the sound of a cinema projector, the rhythmic whir, whir, whir of film spinning on a reel. And beneath it, a woman's voice, distorted and layered as if recorded 1,000 times over. "Is the movie over, John?" The door at the bottom of the stairs creaked open. John backed away from the door, retreating into the darkened department store on the second floor. He hid behind a rack of heavy winter coats, burying himself in the wool and polyester, praying his heartbeat wouldn't give him away. The footsteps entered the room. They were heavy, wet, and rhythmic. The smell hit him then, the scent of ozone, burnt film, and rotting lilies. The coats beside him began to rustle. Someone was walking down the aisle, running their hand along the garments. The sound was right in front of him now. The coats parted. John looked up. The ghost lady wasn't looking at him with eyes. She was leaning down, her face inches from his, the black void of her mouth exhaling a cold, dead mist. "The credits are still rolling," she whispered, her voice echoing inside his own skull. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing John saw before the world turned into static was the woman reaching out with fingers that felt like cold, damp cinematic film, wrapping them tightly around his throat. The next morning, the mall security found the north exit doors unlocked. In the cinema, on the screen of Theater 4, a single frame was frozen. It showed a man in row L, his face twisted in a silent scream, his image grainy and flickering, forever trapped in the final act. The streetlights on Elmhurst Avenue didn't so much illuminate the road as they did create pockets of sickly orange haze that struggled against the encroaching October fog. Gilbert checked his watch. 12:42 a.m. The last bus had hummed past 20 minutes ago, leaving him with a 3-mile walk through a part of town that felt increasingly unfamiliar after dark. Gilbert was not a man prone to superstition. He was a data analyst, a man of spreadsheets, logic, and cold, hard facts. But as he stepped off the main thoroughfare and into the narrow, residential veins of the suburbs, the facts began to feel slippery. The first anomaly was the sound. It was rhythmic, timed perfectly to his own stride. When he stepped with his right foot, there was a sharp clack. When his left foot landed, a dry scrape followed, like a heavy bag being dragged over gravel. Gilbert stopped. He turned his head, straining his eyes against the gloom. The street was empty. Row after row of darkened windows stared back at him like the sightless eyes of the dead. He started walking again, faster this time. The sound wasn't behind him anymore. It was beside him. He looked to his left, at the manicured hedges of a Victorian-era house. The shadows there seemed too dense, too liquid. He could have sworn the darkness between the leaves pulsed, exhaling a faint scent of wet earth and copper. "Hello?" Gilbert called out. His voice sounded thin, brittle in the cold air. No answer. Only the distant hum of a transformer on a utility pole. He broke into a jog. His breath came in ragged plumes of white. He was only 6 blocks from his apartment now. He just needed to reach the intersection of 4th and Main, where the 24-hour deli provided a sanctuary of fluorescent light and cheap coffee. But as he turned the corner onto 4th, the streetlights didn't just flicker. They died. One by one, in a cascading wave of darkness that raced toward him from the far end of the block. Gilbert froze. The silence was absolute. Then, from the darkness ahead, the sound returned. It was louder now, much closer. Then a new sound, a wet, rhythmic clicking, like teeth being tapped together. Gilbert reached into his pocket and fumbled for his phone. His fingers were numb with cold. He managed to swipe the screen and activate the flashlight. The beam cut through the fog, a desperate yellow spear. In the center of the road, 30 feet away, stood a figure. It was impossibly tall, perhaps 7 feet, and gaunt to the point of being skeletal. It wore a suit that might have been black once, but was now gray with dust and mold. The sleeves ended abruptly, revealing hands with fingers that had too many knuckles, twitching in the light. But it was the face that made Gilbert's heart stutter. It wasn't a face so much as a mask of pale, stretched skin. There were no eyes, only deep, bruised hollows. The mouth was a jagged, horizontal slit that stretched from ear to ear, held together by thick, rusted staples. The creature tilted its head. The staples groaned. The thing took a step forward. Its right leg was a jagged splinter of bone, the clack. It dragged its left foot, which appeared to be encased in a heavy, rotting leather boot. Gilbert didn't scream. His throat had constricted, cutting off the air. He turned and bolted. He didn't care about the deli anymore. He ran blindly down an alleyway, his phone light dancing wildly off brick walls and overflowing trash cans. He reached the end of the alley and burst onto his own street. There it was, the brick facade of his apartment building. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them. The sound was right behind his ear. He dove for the keys, snatched them up, and jammed the fob against the electronic lock. The door clicked. He threw himself inside, slammed the heavy oak door shut, and leaned his back against it, sobbing for breath. He was safe. The lobby was bright. The elevator was waiting. He rode up to the 4th floor in a daze. Inside his apartment, he locked the deadbolt, the chain, and the latch. He moved through his home, turning on every single light until the flat was a blinding sanctuary. He sat on his sofa, clutching a kitchen knife, staring at the door. An hour passed. Then, 2. The adrenaline began to recede, replaced by the crushing weight of exhaustion. He began to convince himself it was a hallucination, a trick of the fog and the late-hour stress. A tall man in a tattered coat, that was all. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The sound didn't come from the hallway. It came from the floorboards beneath his feet. Gilbert looked down. A dark, viscous liquid was beginning to seep up between the cracks of his hardwood floor. It smelled of wet earth and copper. Then he heard a new sound. It was faint, coming from his own pocket. He pulled out his phone. The screen was black, but a voice was coming through the speaker. It was a distorted, metallic version of his own voice, played back at half speed. "Hello?" the phone Gilbert asked. "Hello? Hello?" The jagged slit of a mouth began to form in the center of Gilbert's living room wall, the drywall cracking and peeling back like skin. The staples began to pop out one by one, hitting the floor with a heavy clink. Gilbert realized then that he hadn't gone home alone. He had simply brought the silence with him, and now the silence was hungry.